Hello. So this is a video response to essentially Tim Tyler's response to my Qualia test. So here's a little bit of background. So some people, for a long, I'm not entirely sure for how long. Well, even a further background would be okay. There is this really large and ongoing debate about the nature of Qualia, but more specifically about the testability of Qualia. One response that has been provided to this question in general is that we could potentially focus on how the phenomenal binding is happening in our consciousness. That is to say, how is it possible that the left and the right side of the visual field are part of one unitary integrated experience, and so on. The kind of solution that is being proposed here is that once we understand by experimentally verifying what are the necessary conditions for phenomenal binding, then we can reconstruct those conditions in a way that allows the phenomenal binding of experiences that are happening in two distinct brains. What this might look like is essentially providing some kind of artificial neural connection, maybe even made of artificial neural tissue, that would literally connect, say, the brain of person A and person B. Under some relatively minor assumptions and with a sufficient allowance for training, it is not inconceivable that given, say, non-radical skepticism conditions, or and well, for sure in all physicalist versions of the nature of the mind-body problem, what this would allow would be two minds to become one if the procedure is done properly. So it has been suggested that this procedure may, in a sense, solve the kind of skepticism that we may have about the existence of other minds, and also more generally about the possibility of testing the existence of Qualia modulated or generated or channeled or whatever it may be the case, but in a sense like causally present in a physical system that you might want to test. Well, one concern, one counter-argument to this provided by utilitarianessays.com, Brian Tomasik, I think, is that in a sense we already, well, the fact that in such scenario your consciousness would increase in say size and capabilities would still leave the question of like whether that is really just you increasing, and whether like phenomenal consciousness existed already in the other person to begin with. And that is a very valid concern. More so, he explains how, for example, using pen and pencil expands your working memory in some substantial sense, and using computers and so on also have like cognitive enhancing effects. And hence, like the fact that something enhances your cognition in some non-trivial sense doesn't, again, is like neither very surprising and doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the consciousness of that entity or whatever mechanism is helping you expand. So he proposes that, well, in a sense, what you may suspect is that even if your consciousness is being expanded, that really is just kind of you having more senses and more capacity to experience things, but again, not something that could make you inferred that it is necessarily the case that consciousness exists in that other entity. And I agree that from a purely logical point of view, in the sense of language of necessity and implication, it is the case that it could be possible that the entity being tested was not conscious before, and at the time of connecting with you, really the only thing that happened was that your consciousness expanded. And yes, this is logically possible. However, it is not very likely. And actually, I think there is a very strong Bayesian case that you can make for a really significant updating that would happen if you actually do connect your brain to that of another person, and something like duplicating the size of your consciousness and your information processing capabilities and accessible memories and so on would suggest. And the argument is really just goes as follows. The set of possible universes in which, say, other people act as if they are conscious even though they are not, that also happen to have this property that when you connect to those minds, your consciousness increases in such a dramatic sense, is really just a fraction of the universes in which people act like they're conscious, and something or other, but not necessarily increasing in consciousness, may happen when you connect yourself to other persons. So essentially, by you connecting your mind to others and this radically expanding your consciousness, you are essentially ruling out the bulk of the hypothesis space that involves some measure of skepticism of other minds. And yeah, I will say that this doesn't go further than a probabilistic argument. However, I would say that there are many reasons to think that it's actually a very radical reduction in probability. But regardless, if a person still says they're not convinced, well, I recently thought about something else, and that goes as follows. I think I will call this argument the Qualia puzzle experiment, or something along those lines. So essentially, there are some kind of puzzles that can be posed to you that you require exploring the syntax and the nature of phenomenology in order to solve. To give an example, if you were asked to map out the similarity between different phenomenal colors, essentially, if you were to ask to map out the layout of relationships that exist in phenomenal space for the experience of color, you would reach the conclusion, if actually you make a sufficient number of experiments and you're good at this sort of thing, that yellow and blue are roughly in opposite sides of one spectrum. And the same goes for red and green. So that adding yellow and blue is phenomenally impossible without canceling each other out or becoming white, or I think actually just canceling each other out. However, there are other combinations of colors that are allowed, such as red and yellow. That one is really intuitive. As a kid, I used to think, well, it is clearly understandable how orange really exists in a whole set of graduations that depend on how red or yellow it is. Even though, red and yellow are kind of different in a sense, they do mix up together well. However, yellow and blue are really different, and the moment you mix them together, you get a completely unexpected color that could have not been predicted from just observing the yellow and the blue. Now, it so happens that actually when you mix the spectral power distributions of the colors that of the frequencies of light that map out into our phenomenal blue and our phenomenal yellow, you do experience green. However, this is really just only something that happens in the space of the input. Essentially, like the possible combinations in the state space of things that map into phenomenal experience. In fact, color is completely underdetermined. The spectral power distribution of a color is completely underdetermined. There are many spectral power distributions, actually infinitely many so, that map onto the same phenomenal color. So really, when you're mixing two things that actually happen to map out into the same phenomenal color, the kind of combination that you will have well, there's really nothing that follows logically from our phenomenal experience in any way. And again, when you examine it deeply, you will come to realize that green and red also exist in different parts of the spectrum. Rather, they're different poles of the same axis. And again, the two axes can combine in any way, but the two extremes of the same axis cannot. Okay, so this is one kind of puzzle that I'm thinking of. Of course, we would like a very large number of standardized puzzles of this sort, in which the solution of them would be hopefully easily to understand, or rather easily to check with consciousness, and also only possible to check with consciousness. And here is an important thing that I have to highlight, and that is that they have to be only possible to check in the sense of referring to the phenomenal colors and not to the kinds of things that tend to map into them. And here there's actually one big asterisk that relates to epiphenomenalism that we could visit later on, or maybe I will have to revisit, where like a few further objections could be made that I mean, still kind of with the spirit of seeing that it's like not logically necessary that this kind of test would work. And yeah, I could revisit them later. But just okay, to finish off the proposed phenomenal Qualia puzzle test. So imagine that you do have a very, say, like a few number of these kinds of puzzles, so that if a person is curious about the consciousness of another entity, what he or she would do would be to take one of these Qualia puzzles that he or she doesn't know the answer to, but that they know that with certain conscious capabilities, an entity usually tends to answer it within a span of time that is known. For example, like say between 10 minutes and a day or something like that. So what you would do is you would take this puzzle and understand its formulation, then connect your brain to the entity whose consciousness you're trying to test. If you indeed become one at that point, and all of a sudden you find yourself with like greatly expanded conscious experiences, but also with the memory of understanding that particular puzzle, then you remind you to yourself that puzzle exists, so that the other brain has a memory of it. Then you disconnect yourself so that you come to brains again, and you just wait for a few days, or how maybe you even ask the other entity whether they have solved the puzzle or not. And when they do, then you reconnect yourself to it. And if now, as one entity, you find yourself with the knowledge about the solution to this puzzle, then it would be the case that if the other entity didn't solve this puzzle consciously, then information would have come out of nowhere. And that, I would say, at this point would be so close to zero probability that we can really, I think, consider it an authoritative test. I mean, especially if this kind of test is the sort of thing that you do with a wide variety of different Qualia puzzles, and like you repeat it over and over. Yeah, I mean, in that kind of scenario, I think it would be like scientifically understood that the probability of consciousness to not be shared, and that what is happening at phenomenal binding is not how we're modeling at that point, at least in terms of how it is experienced, i.e. That there are actually different streams of consciousness that can be merged and fissioned. Yeah, the probability that is not the case would be extremely low, and more so if anybody doubts it, they could just go ahead and test it several times if they want to. Well, okay. So all of these was to lead you to the point in which Tim Tyler responded that there is one caveat here, and that is that he doesn't see why the other entity wouldn't be able to make this kind of solution to the puzzle just using normal input and output and computational methods. Essentially just like looking at how the brain operates in the most in a reductionist sense. And I definitely don't mean reductionist here in any pejorative way. I mean it in the sense of making completely formal representations of the operation of the brain at a very deep and lower level. So I can see how he would think about it in this way. However, I think that the moment you realize that you have that the puzzle is on particular combinations of qualia, and that more so, our understanding of the puzzle relies on it being about specific qualia combinations, and there is nowhere in that system that has actually made a model about the lower level understanding of what's going on. Then it would be essentially magic that at the moment you disconnect, it just happens to be the case that there is a really profound understanding of the lower level that is going on there. Could this be perhaps the operation of a super intelligence that understands consciousness at such a low level that it could be able to formulate a way of passing this test? I very much doubt it. Again, because that other intelligence, at least to corroborate the intentionality of our experiment, would have to have some understanding of what the intentionality really refers to. And intentionality here is meant in the sense of the aboutness of the experience, which in a sense is, I would say, impossible, but at least there is a really strong case that it's extremely difficult to reduce to lower level configurations, because you're actually talking about a semantic quality, like the aboutness of things. And when you're talking about the aboutness of qualia, and the puzzle is happening in that space, and because there is no logical entailment from physical configurations to qualia, unless you believe it to be so. That is a whole different discussion. Then it's impossible to predict where like the intentionality will be. So let's say that I am combining yellow and blue, and that is the aboutness of it, like any sort of like lower level simulation of what's going on. In me, that is like looking at the kind of the symbols that I'm operating in my mind, would not be able to come up with would not be able to come up with the fact that it's impossible to combine them. Although I could definitely see Tim Tyler further arguing that that implication is still entailed by the lower level processing, even in the absence of a logical, even in the absence of a conscious understanding. And here I would have to wonder whether this implies epiphenomenalism, and I think it does. I think it does. Although the actual really, I don't have really like access to the argument to this. I don't think I have thought that deeply about it, this particular point. But I think anybody familiar with the kind of arguments that you have against epiphenomenalism would see that these very much it fits the pattern of the class of things that are set within that explanation space. In any case, I think that the point of intentionality here, and the fact that the puzzle is actually referring to particular phenomenal representations, makes it logically impossible to anticipate it. And even if say it was logically possible, you would still require a low-level understanding of it or modeling of it, which would require extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary attention to detail and analysis and experimentation and modeling and whatnot. Maybe you would be able to conclude that either the other one is conscious or like that superintelligence exists. The superintelligence exists that created this. I mean, maybe even if you want, like, let's say a non-sentient superintelligence that does typographical manipulations was able to fool you into thinking that the test was passed. Okay, like modulo those extreme cases and some doubtful assumptions, such as like the possibility of the logical link between consciousness and the possible logical inference from like referencing in Qualia and physical processes. So in any case, it would still be, I think, regarded as an authoritative test, and that would be pretty good. Why? Because it would really allow us to understand consciousness and the narrative making of reality, and hence actually the profound dialectic that is happening across every person's minds. That all of that is actually going on, and how it is going on, really understanding and studied deeply. In any case, yes, all of these things, or at least like this particular follow-up to Brian Tomasik's comments, are things that I've been thinking out recently. I had thought about the connecting part, the test of connecting your brain to others for a long time, for many years now. But Brian Tomasik sort of incited me to see it a little bit deeper and see whether I could think of anything else. And it seems that there is something else that can be done. And to my knowledge, no other philosopher has thought about this particular idea. So I was pretty excited to imagine it as a possibility, and how really in the future, the kind of philosophical discussion that goes on in introductory philosophy courses, or in the whole life of some curious persons about other minds and consciousness, specifically about the skepticism about other minds, would really be kind of a thing of the past, or a thing that is much more a thing of the past. And we would understand that really, we would have a very different view on personal identity, and a much deeper philosophical understanding of things. I wouldn't say appreciation, because I think really appreciation has more to do with hedonic tone. But in some sense, if you have to choose between some kind of appreciation with high hedonic tone but not necessarily very profound semantic content, or appreciation with the same hedonic tone but a much deeper semantic content, for sure I choose the second one. So I suppose it's still relevant for quality of life in and of itself, but I think it will be extremely relevant for quality of life because of its consequences. That is to say, because of the way in which conducting these tests and understanding narrative and meaning making at such a deep level, the concept of that would be tremendous in the intent of eradicating or greatly diminishing suffering throughout the living world, and these kind of purposes. So yeah, yeah. In any case, I could discuss about many other topics surrounding this particular dialogue, but that will be for another video. And yeah, I'm happy I expressed my thoughts. Ciao.